Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guest, Dr. Garg, thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Siggi Huegemann and I'm the Secretary General of the African Hydrogen Partnership, the only continent-wide African association dedicated to green and natural hydrogen in Africa. So I've been following the hydrogen and fuel cell tech literally for 40 years. I was one of the very, very first individuals joining the German Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association some 20 years ago. And then back in 2014, when Toyota and Hyundai released the first commercially available hydrogen fuel cell passenger cars to the market, then I thought, now the time has come to do something in, with, for Africa, for all the well-known reasons the world hydrogen community is talking about. So I initiated that work in Africa with the aim to establish the continent-wide association. The next slide. And that has worked out quite nicely. The African Hydrogen Partnership was registered in Mauritius in November 2020. And then we started taking in new members in March 2021. So names include Anglo-American, Mizuho Bank, Hydrogen Europe, the NIA Hydrogen Alliance, etc. We are a non-profit organization and we are financially independent. And that was really important for us to demonstrate that we are talking about Africa, one of the poorest regions in the world, but we kept our financial independence right from the start. We built it up from scratch. We are in nobody's pocket and can do a completely independent type of approach and policy. So we are fully compliant with international rules and regulations, and that was one of the reasons why we went for Mauritius. Every organization that applies for HP membership needs to go through a proper due diligence and background check. So even that is quite unusual for international associations or hydrogen associations. We are doing it. And by doing that, we have been able to create this type of, call it a bit, elite association. So at the moment we have 33 members, something like now 10 or so, plus minus a few. Applicants are in the pipeline, really strong names as well. And now please go to the next slide. But before I provide you with more details, let me start with some really, really good news. And I said that last year at COP27. And at that time, some really realized what that means, but now it has become a real big topic, specifically when people talk about Africa as well as Europe. And then now we are getting there more and more global attention, and we'll discuss that at COP28 as well. And that relates to baseload renewable power using hydrogen. One of our pioneer members is HDF Energy, and they will start the construction on a commercially feasible, financially viable, and bankable project in Namibia. It's a $250 million investment, and hydrogen is an essential part. So how does that basically work? Think about a renewable energy farm producing wind, producing solar, and when you have a lot of surplus energy, renewable energy, you take the energy, it goes into an electrolyzer, it produces hydrogen, and flow there into a tank. Yeah? So, and when you have very little energy available or huge demand, you take the hydrogen out of a tank, it goes into a fuel cell, and from there, then the energy goes to the electric grid. Now think about nations, that do not have very strong power grids, where you have diesel generators, yeah, and where a kilowatt hour might cost you 50, 60, 70 cents. In some of the regions of Africa, we are talking about more than $1 per kilowatt hour. Yeah, that is a significant amount of money, hugely expensive. And this is where hydrogen really comes into play. So actually, I introduce HDF Energy directly to representatives of the Namibian government. Last year, we went to Somalia and Tanzania. They are now active in 8 African nations. Yeah? There's another aspect that hydrogen offers here, and that is a continuous baseload. So my wife is from the east coast of Africa. I have their property as well, and everyone who has been to Africa knows what power cuts, load shedding, etc. means. Using that technology, one can provide, continuous power load subject to the demand of the end consumers. So that is really showing that the large-scale commercialization has started. It depends on the market sector and it depends on the region. And that should be our focus. We have to get the knowledge now out of the universities. We have to work together and say, where are the markets? Where are the regions? How can we make money with this? So next slide, please. So here's now the commercialization. It's slightly differently viewed. So you can see a sequence there in the upper row, short-term, medium-term, long-term. View it like long-term is the export market, and I don't want to talk about this today. Everyone talks about export, 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 export. You know, we are supporting the export model as well, but now going to the left side, what we are talking about here now is the short-term development, the domestic market, and that is really extremely interesting for the Global South. And we are talking about India, we are talking about African nations, we are talking about Australia. And why is that? Now let me run you through this, you know, step by step. Now first we have the hard-to-abate sectors, yeah? And in Africa, I already mentioned baseload renewable power. That is happening. Shipping fuel, fuel for the large container ships, etc. This will not happen with battery to decarbonize that industry. Hydrogen is the only solution in whatever shape and form. You know, whether we are talking about ammonia, whether we are talking about methanol, yeah? And the Indian Ocean region, to say that very, very clearly, you know, can take over the lead, can kickstart certain developments. They can do that here. Can you do that easily in Europe? I'm of German origin. It's not easily possible. So we might have an energy poverty problem in the Global South, but the Global North, specifically talking about Europe, has a green energy poverty problem. We can produce here low-cost green hydrogen on site, and that is a tremendously competitive advantage if we can achieve the scale and make that happen. Yeah? So fertilizer, ammonia, Sable Chemicals from Zimbabwe is one of our pioneer members as well. They have produced green fertilizer for decades in Zimbabwe. They started in 1969, and they needed to stop that back in 2015. And the reason for that was primarily climate change, because they got the electricity from the hydropower dams, and due to the fluctuating levels caused by climate change, you know, this whole model was completely disrupted, and they couldn't do that anymore. So what is the key here now in terms of the green fertilizer production? You know, it's the overland transport. You know, the further you are inside, and the more costly the overland transport is of gray fertilizer, dirty fertilizer, the more competitive becomes green fertilizer locally produced. So shipping fuel, I mentioned that. Anyway, that is basically the source of the revenue. Now the next thing is, and that is really important, you know, for the Global South, that we see the strengths of the Global South. It's a type of the markets. The export market, and that is actually, you know, my educational background. I'm a finance quant, so I've worked for 25 years on the buy-side asset management, etc. So simulation of different financial models associated with financial derivatives primarily. Yeah? So the long-term development export, you know, requires highly subsidized markets, yeah, that require financial derivatives. Extremely risky. However, you know, the cash and spot markets, as we see in Namibia, if we have a valid case, we can cash right in. 30 days later, the cash is in your account. You don't need to have, you know, for those markets, the financial derivatives markets, highly subsidized, that are required for export. So now, possibly, and that's why it's in the middle, it's the most important aspect. It's a distance to market. Yeah? Distance to market is, and that is our philosophy in Africa, produce the hydrogen where it's consumed. It's extremely difficult and expensive to transport hydrogen over long distances. Yeah? But if you produce it on site, as Sable Chemicals did for decades, or Namibia, you know, HDF Energy is doing it right now, you address this cost factor. And here's where India, where Africa have a tremendous cost advantage over Europe, over other regions in the global north. You have everything, you basically need for making this happen. Now, and in this context, please allow me to mention it, that has come here a bit short, that is natural hydrogen. So another pioneer member of the African Hydrogen Partnership is HDF Energy from Mali. Yeah? So I guess you have heard about this. In Mali, they have millions of tons of natural hydrogen in the ground. Yeah? And some geologists, and there are quite a few, assume that India might have natural hydrogen resources as well. You drill a hole in the ground, hydrogen comes out, and you have rainy seasons, possibly, if you're lucky, it's getting replenished as well. So, low production costs in India in comparison to the global north? Yes. Can you minimize the transportation costs? Yes. Can you minimize the refueling costs? Yes. And that is a tremendous advantage here. Plus, you have, the most precious assets that you have are your people. You have the sheer numbers for producing the engineers, the technicians, the IT experts, and so on and so forth for making this happen. Then electric grid in Africa. So think about Nigeria, 220 million people, installed 5.5 gigawatt. The UK, Germany, France combined, similar population size, 220 million people. But, they have 420 plus gigawatts. So what has happened in Nigeria, and nobody knows that precisely, they have an installed diesel power generation capacity of at least 40 plus gigawatt. That is basically half of the power generation capacity of the whole of the UK, just diesel generators. And last year, actually I started the development in Somalia at the Horn, Somaliland, at the Horn of Africa. Yeah? So in Hargeisa, 2 million people, they're still generating their power using large diesel generators, ship engines. So we went there, organized a delegation, and the things are now developing very, very nicely there. Because these are commercial opportunities. Yeah? If a kilowatt hour costs you 70 or 80 US dollar cents, of course you can price that out of the market. Yeah? So, and then last but not least, the cost of the refined fossil fuels. Diesel is expensive. But now over to the next slide. Can I have, yep. So today is a very special event for us here because the HP would like to announce that we have established now the first representation here in India in order to form this alliance, of nations around, the Indian Ocean and the Global South. But now over to Sandeep Pratap, my good colleague.